So welcome everyone to the Anti-Racist Leadership Learning Training video. This is the first of, I hope, many videos to come with the EIS's approach to anti-racist work and activity. And Yasmin and I will be delivering this session for you. So it's really important for us to begin to set the context for this training. And we've borrowed from Kimberly Crenshaw's quote here, because the idea of the training here is that we hope to support EIS union reps, equality reps, local association secretaries, our head teachers and leaders in schools, and also our BAME teachers within schools, to begin to think about anti-racist training, anti-racist work within their institutions. But this all-important idea that we need to start with developing a more nuanced understanding of what race and racism is, how it manifests, and the different experiences that our young people are exposed to, and also our BAME staff. So this quote is particularly relevant here, and we're hoping that through these sessions and through the package, the resource package that has been provided also, that you do begin to develop that social justice lens that helps you to begin to disrupt and dismantle the status quo and begin to think about processes that are fit for purpose. So welcome to the session. We'll start with the underrepresentation, folks. It's not, this is nothing new. We know of these statistics very well by now, that, and as you can see from the slide here, that BME teachers are severely underrepresented. Even within the primary sector, 1% or around 1.4% of the workforce are from a BME background. When we look at the promoted posts across the whole of our profession, then 0.6% are in promoted posts. And that raises a number of questions, folks, in terms of, you know, having a diverse workforce has huge benefits to the whole sector. So pupils, colleagues, and just in general in terms of education and looking at how we provide those diverse voices, that diverse thinking. So we really need to address this issue. It is important to remember that recruitment is really important, but we also need to think about the BME workforce as they currently exist within the profession. The many barriers, the challenges that they are facing have to be considered, because only then can we perhaps attract BAME young people into this profession, where they see teachers who look like them, where they see BME teachers in those promoted posts, in those senior leadership posts. And that's really key. So part of this training obviously will be to think about how listen to the voices, I guess, and centre the voices of our BME educators and learn about some of those challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis, because only then are we able to begin to work together as a profession, as colleagues, to move the narrative forward and be able to support our BAME workforce also. That takes us, folks, to this slide here in terms of let's take stock, and it's absolutely important. And I think there have been some, although that I'm saying here conversations about racism and whiteness are missing within education in Scotland. This was a short piece that I wrote for the Runnymede Trust in this particular document. And I still hold truth to that I think that we have many more conversations to be had. We have to sustain that dialogue in order to see progress. And the other aspect of this work is the article I wrote for the Teaching Scotland magazine, GTCS, The Conspiracy of Silence. In that, folks, I talk about the importance of our colleagues, our teachers within the profession, who need to take stock and need to begin to think that when they remain silent on issues around racism and discrimination, then we in fact are complicit within those, and so we need to challenge that bystander approach rather, and begin to think about our responsibilities as teachers in addressing race and racism, in supporting our pupils and our fellow colleagues. I guess also what I want to add here is about policy and how oftentimes we find that BME teachers are invisible when it comes to policy formation around education for professional development programmes. And we really are, as a SAMI organisation, trying to liaise with key stakeholders in looking at BME teachers' professional learning and development, talking to key stakeholders such as Scottish Government, and looking at how we can open up those opportunities in terms of recruitment, retention and promotion within the profession for our BME educators.
Khadija, I think it's really important at this point for us to acknowledge as a professional community the disadvantages of any professional group being underrepresented within a sector. And certainly with respect to BME teachers being underrepresented, it suggests that the wider society is not being reflected in our learning spaces. It also makes it harder for BME teachers to be heard, because for many, they may be a lone voice within their working environment, within their school environment. But most importantly, it then suggests that we don't have particularly inclusive workspaces. And it's incredibly important as we work towards diversity, equality and inclusion, that we ensure that our working environments represent wider society, but we also ensure that all voices are represented in every aspect of the workplace. And therefore, whilst we have spoken about underrepresentation for many years with respect to BME teachers, we need to get to a point where, as practitioners, we understand that it is detrimental for us to continue to have underrepresentation in the teaching workforce. It's detrimental for our young people who simply don't have those role models and will not consider teaching as a profession that they wish to progress into. It's detrimental for the curriculum, where there won't be that diversity in the curriculum that we're teaching our young people. But most importantly, it's also detrimental for the wider teaching community, who then don't have the opportunity. White teachers don't have the opportunity to work with and engage with and learn from BME teachers and the culture that brings, the cultural diversity that brings. And therefore, I think we need to get beyond the point where we're simply looking at statistics and trying to improve statistics, but actually look at how detrimental it is, how detrimental that ongoing underrepresentation is for the education sector and wider society. In the context of the discussions that colleagues are likely to have across the EIS community, many discussions may be centred around the Fair Work Framework for Scotland and fairness and equality for BME teachers in their workplace. The 5 key areas that the Fair Work Framework centres on are effective voice, opportunity, security, fulfilment and respect.
Effective voice is one of the 5 dimensions, and within that, folks, we need to be thinking about the ethos within any institution, with it being a safe environment for BME teachers to be able to use their voice and be heard when discussions are taking place, whether it's curriculum development, professional development, supporting pupils and parents. So those views are absolutely sought out and listened to, because when we refer to the previous quote, they often feel that they are still very invisible when it comes to perspectives that shape school policy, curriculum, and so on. We also need to think about how effective voice does make a difference and enhances the services that we can provide within our schools to supporting parents and our young people, and also supporting our BME colleagues. But again, with any discussions around a diverse workforce, the added value that cognitive diversity brings as a real benefit to the performance of any institution that has a diverse workforce. And we're just sharing some examples here from a piece of research that was conducted with BME teachers across Scotland. And this particular participant has said, I bring my colour into the classroom and I bring my culture into the classroom. And she talks more openly about the fact that young people may have not seen a female Asian woman before. And she refers obviously to a particular pocket within a Glasgow community. But again, it's that visibility that is being referenced here. And that she's very comfortable in recognising that she takes that part of her, so the whole part of her identity into a classroom, where on the other hand, we have another participant who is saying, I try my best not to bring my personal identity into the classroom, but it does. And I think the subsequent conversations from these interviews were, well, you can't change the colour of your skin. So whether you try your best to leave an aspect of your identity at the school front door, you actually are taking it in with you. And why do we feel that we have some of our BME practitioners who feel quite confident in taking their whole self into a classroom situation, and where others don't? And what are the implications and the reasons behind this? The other aspect here is opportunity, and we've discussed that previously in a sense of opportunities for promotion for our BME teachers, but also those opportunities to contribute to policy formation, curriculum development, and so on. So we need to be thinking about that in terms of attitudes, behaviours, policies, and practices.
With respect to the lived experiences of BME practitioners, it suggests that there's a lot of strategic manoeuvring that takes place for BME teachers. There's a lot of decision making that's involved, decision making with respect to what version of themselves they can present to their work colleagues, which aspects of their personality, their professional personality and their personal personality they feel confident and safe enough to present in their workspace. And that suggests that there's a lack of authenticity. And for many BME practitioners that Khadija and I speak with, that's a struggle. It's exhausting. It causes fatigue. And certainly it suggests that as a wider professional community, we must create safe spaces. We work incredibly hard to create safe spaces for our learners. We must also create safe spaces for our practitioners so that they can bring their true selves, their true identities into the workplace and feel comfortable doing so. The discussions that we've had with the EIS community over the past few months suggests that there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity to create that safe space for BME practitioners. And it's very much by way of a professional network. The BME network that has been established is an opportunity to ensure that voices are amplified, to ensure that all voices are heard. And therefore, BME practitioners who may be isolated because they are the only BME practitioner in their workplace, are isolated due to geography, feel that there is a support network, that there is a group of colleagues, both BME colleagues and colleagues from the dominant group across the sector who are there as an opportunity to liaise with, for support, but most importantly, to ensure that they have an opportunity to encourage further allyship. The conversations that Khadija and I had with the EIS community during our discussions suggest that BME practitioners feel that there is a lack of opportunity to be heard, a lack of opportunity to be represented in policy, in practice, in curriculum. There's also a lack of opportunity with respect to professional development and progression. That stems from a lack of understanding with respect to the skills, the added value, and the competencies of BME practitioners. But it also suggests that for many who perhaps haven't worked with BME practitioners previously, they have adopted particular stereotypes and prejudices with respect to BME practitioners. We've spoken about biases and prejudices and a lack of professional development. This is then an opportunity to talk about and where are those stereotypes, and how are those stereotypes and that bias and that lack of awareness, how is that affecting BME practitioners? Well, it's affecting them because the challenges that they face with respect to professional development is being overlooked. It's not being addressed in the same way, and it's not being understood.
The comments from some head teachers in Glasgow City Council when they were looking at ethnic diversity in the teaching profession are interesting here. And I think a lot of this speaks to that, the being present and being invisible here, in the sense of a secondary head teacher saying, I have no reason to think about promotion is more difficult for teachers from a minority ethnic background. And the other head teacher's view is that they are proportionally represented at each level. And maybe perhaps this head teacher is referring to the statistics that they are already quite low and underrepresented, so therefore the percentage for promoted posts equally represents that. However, again, it just reinforces, I think, where we need leaders within our schools to understand and begin to unpack the challenges that many of our BME teachers are facing when seeking promotion opportunities and looking for those professional development opportunities in regards to leadership. Security is the third dimension of the Fair Work framework, and two aspects here that are important to consider: stability and transparency. And what we know of our BME workforce is that stability really is uncertain. Many of them report experiencing racism in the workplace, whether it's from young people or whether it's from their fellow colleagues or parents. Oftentimes they feel quite vulnerable and sensitive to these situations. They also sometimes report that they don't feel that they are being supported well enough by their colleagues in dealing with those issues. And I guess in order for them to feel a bit secure, transparency is key. We need to have those very candid, courageous conversations with our leaders in terms of supporting our BME teachers and our young people. And so how that manifests and how that is progressed is really important. We can see from some of the quotes from BME teachers when they talk about this idea of security. When I am in school, I am just a teacher. I can't be myself. And that refers to perhaps some of the comments Yasmin made earlier about being able to bring your whole self in to your school setting. And why is it that we have our BME teachers saying, I can't do that. I don't feel able to bring in my whole self. I have to make a choice. We also have some BME teachers reporting, I have to be whiter than white. And again, in reference to this, having to work perhaps doubly hard in order to be recognised. or to feel secure within their job, that they are doing the right thing, that they are competent practitioners. And again, we need to explore that further as well. One particular participant reported that they're aware of teachers who have left. They have become so disengaged and disheartened because they can't get on to the next rung of the ladder. So where is that stability in terms of career progression? Where is that stability in finding support from, you know, your line manager or your head teacher who is supporting your professional development with regards to the BME teachers? And this particular comment here is quite telling, perhaps, of the lack of confidence or that invisibility around these discussions. Senior management are unwilling to do anything. They either don't know how to or they ignore it, hoping the issue will go away. And I think this is quite important for us to consider, particularly for our senior leaders within schools, that we need to address this. We need to begin to really centre the voices of our BME practitioners, whether they are raising concerns about discrimination, whether they are looking for some really constructive conversations about their professional development, and perhaps looking for advice on applying for promoted posts and so on. So we really need that careful consideration moving forward.
When professionals feel a lack of security in their workplace, it generates fear. It generates a fear of what the consequences are going to be for them. It generates a fear with respect to what their future is in that particular sector. And there's an ongoing sense of dread with respect to what they can expect or how they can expect their colleagues or their line managers to behave with them that particular day. And therefore, it's incredibly important that we provide that security and that stability for colleagues who are underrepresented, who are very much the minority in a sector. Isolation, elimination, exclusion from conversations, from particular activity, from progression or activities that encourage progression, chip away at self-esteem and self-confidence, and that instigates fear. And therefore, it's incredibly important that we start to have those discussions that allow practitioners, BME practitioners, to overcome those fears that they have with respect to what they are likely to encounter in their workspace, what they're likely to encounter on a day-to-day basis. It's incredibly important that we start to allow them to heal from their experiences, but also we make other colleagues aware. We make other colleagues aware of how isolating and how hurtful some of the behaviours can be that lead to exclusion and lead to isolation.
Fulfilment, another aspect of the framework dimensions. And again, I think this is particularly important when it comes to anybody in any workforce, that they find fulfilment in the job that they do and the profession that they have joined. And again, this seems to be, when we think about it from a fair framework perspective, we argue here that many BME teachers do not achieve this fulfilment. In many ways, part of some of the things that Yasmin has already discussed, but this idea of opportunities for personal growth and career advancement are very much missing. We see that from the statistics that we have provided earlier on. 0.6% are in promoted posts, and many of them will report that opportunities for professional development often don't come their way. Or when they do embark on a particular programme, they sometimes feel that the programme, they don't see themselves, they don't recognise themselves within the programme, their skill set is often unrecognised, perhaps. Same conversation about being invisible. So we really are needing to think about our professional development opportunities in terms of programmes that are on offer, but being able to showcase and demonstrate some of the cultural wealth and added value that a diverse workforce brings.
As human beings, we feel fulfilled when we're valued. And in a professional context, the work that we're involved in, when it's acknowledged, when it's spoken about in a positive way, and when it's rewarded, creates fulfillment for us. It encourages professional fulfillment. And therefore it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important that we start to acknowledge when BME practitioners are undermined, when they're undervalued, when they're perpetually criticised for their work, the impact that that is likely to have on their perception of the workplace that they're in, the commitment, the ongoing commitment that they're likely to have to their particular profession and to the sector that they work within. But most importantly, the impact of that lack of fulfillment is going to have on their health and well-being.
So in terms of fulfillment, there are a number of responses from BME teachers, which you can see here. And the one here about, I think I'm able to connect with my kids, that sense of belonging that we're often saying that our young people need to experience. I speak Patois sometimes and they love it. And that fulfillment really comes through there, not just for the young people, but for the teacher as well, because being able to use your first language to build that connection, that rapport with young people is so important. The other one here from a positive aspect is the interaction they have with us, and that's obviously referring to the young people, opens their minds towards people from minority ethnic backgrounds. So again, that fulfillment is really coming through here in the sense that that identity that this teacher is bringing with them into the classroom really does help the young people connect and also start to think about the diverse communities that they live in and begin to make sense of all of that. And this one here about, it's so easy to deliver lesson plans. And as teachers, we know that ourselves, but actually, when you bring your lived experience and diverse backgrounds, it makes the learning, as this particular teacher says here, real and more meaningful and in touch with those we are delivering to. Folks, that's culturally responsive pedagogy. And that's where our BME teachers are able to bring those lived experiences to perhaps add depth to conversations, to encourage our children and our young people to critically think about the content that they are learning and begin to think about, what voices are missing, what histories perhaps that they have not been introduced to, diverse authors and so on and so forth. And that's really important for us to think about, and the fulfillment that brings also when you feel that you're able to add that cultural wealth, that linguistic wealth to your teaching and learning is really important. There's also
and
this
it's certainly more meaningful as well, Khadija.
Yeah.
That approach is certainly far more meaningful. It's less tokenistic, as opposed to encouraging BME colleagues to be involved or to contribute during Black History Month or during Ramadan. I think it's incredibly important that we stress the point that it's about having that meaningful ongoing input as opposed to tokenistic input, that once a year we will reach out to our BME colleagues because it happens to be a religious festival. It needs to be more than that, and it certainly does need to take into consideration the wealth of experience, lived experience that BME practitioners can contribute to the curriculum on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely, Yasmin. And it also perhaps reinforces this notion that in the earlier slides where you had some participants saying, I don't feel comfortable when I'm in class. I try not to take my personal identity in. And why is that the case? And perhaps it's got lots to do with, you know, their own experience of schooling in Scotland, where their identity was not acknowledged, their diverse identities were not acknowledged and nurtured and celebrated, and they were perhaps expected to fit into the majority culture and conform. And so therefore they're less reluctant to bring that into their teaching because they never saw that as they were going through their own schooling. But there are also aspects where it's quite natural, Yasmin, it's that emerging, you know, identity where teachers feel comfortable in navigating those conversations with the young people, and sometimes it's quite natural for those conversations to unfold.
But those middle-aged women, Khadija, how excited are we when we read an article, and it could be about history, it could be about social sciences, it could be about STEM, but it includes a BME role model, or it has a clear influence with respect to diversity, the diversity with respect to either reaching out to different parts of the community with respect to that subject area and what they can bring to that particular part of the curriculum, or it will focus on a particular part of the world, and we become incredibly interested, more interested than we would be if it was pretty much what we'd read on so many other occasions. And if that can still generate that stimulus in us, just think what it would do for young people, particularly young BME learners who just don't see themselves in the curriculum. It's that stimulus, it's that thirst to learn. It's actually about bringing a subject area to life. And by introducing that diversity, by thinking of different ways to ensure that you are bringing different cultural aspects into the curriculum, across the curriculum, beyond history, beyond English Lit, I think there's so many opportunities to engage young people and actually encourage them to then consider future careers that they haven't considered previously.
Absolutely. And I suppose within that, Yasmin, the area of fulfillment, when we have comments such as the one here in yellow, I have no control over my career progression. It's like hitting a brick wall each time, and I'm slowly stepping back. And this disengagement, this experience of, you know, being demoralized often is reported by BME teachers. And so clearly a teacher who does not feel that fulfillment within this regard. So it's something that needs to be explored and discussed further. With regards to respect, folks, again, as it says there quite clearly, you know, this is a two-way process for many of us when we're working with our colleagues, and this notion of dignity at work is really important. And that can extend to, Yasmin, I guess, policies at work, you know, dignity and respect policies at work, you know, and how are they clearly defining how our behaviours, the culture, the ethos within a school setting need to be promoted. And actually, is there opportunities for conflict resolution? How do we begin to actually address issues through restorative practices and not brushed to the side or hoping that the situation will go away, because that's something that's being reported also by BME teachers, where those issues are not being addressed, and so therefore they're left almost in this space, Yasmin, where they feel very vulnerable because they're experiencing it. It's almost that invalidation, you know, that these events or experiences are not happening, that they are perhaps overly sensitive. It's all in their own minds, but actually it's something that needs to be addressed.
We focus a lot on respecting each other, especially when we speak to young people in learning environments. We speak about the importance of respect. We speak about the importance of appropriate behaviours. And yet as adults, as professionals in the workplace, we very rarely speak about respect and dignity at work. And whilst we have beautifully worded policies on dignity and respect, very few colleagues, particularly BME colleagues, are aware that they exist. They certainly at times don't see themselves represented in those particular policies. And those policies are not discussed in the context of accountability and responsibility, that we all as professionals have a responsibility to treat each other with dignity and respect, and accountability when we choose not to treat our colleagues with dignity and respect.
Yeah, and the quotes that you can see here, folks, you'll notice that this quote here, we've repeated it again in this slide, and I think there's no harm. I think it needs to be reinforced and repeated that there are teachers who feel they can't take their whole selves in. So when it comes to respect, what does that mean? What does that look like? But again, here, this is another teacher saying, I just wish my experiences were acknowledged, and the frustration that they feel, that they want to actually scream out and say, I'm here, I'm sitting here, I have a seat at the table. And it would really help that if I was able to share my lived experiences, because it will only bring value to the work of the school and the wider school community. And again, that notion of, promotion, the lack of opportunities, and something really here, we talk often about the glass ceiling, but this particular BME teacher is saying it's not a glass ceiling for us, it's a concrete ceiling. And, and it's not even going anywhere near chipping at this stage. So it just shows that the level of frustration that many BME teachers are facing. They've been teaching for many years, and still professional development and promotion opportunities seem to bypass the BME workforce. And so, folks, the conversation, as we say here, continues, because we still have issues around the professional status of BME teachers, who, and again, I'm referring back to the very quote we had at the beginning, that invisible almost nature, that colourblind approach to looking at the profession, that, do we have to be a particular identity to fit the mould of what it means to be a teacher and what a teacher looks like in Scotland? But we also need to start thinking about the power dynamics here, about the dominant majority culture, and are we encouraging our BAME workforce to fit in to this majority culture, or are we actually absolutely wanting to recognise that teacher identity is where your personal and your professional identity are intimately linked, and that we shouldn't be putting BME teachers in a position where they're having to make that choice, or perhaps forced to make that choice. Do I bring my whole self in, or do I leave aspects at the school gate? And that brings us on to this conversation around race. And we've said here quite clearly, institutional racism, the systemic discrimination that is really at play here. Yasmin.
There are many different forms of racism that BME practitioners and pupils will also face, and they face in the education sector, and they face across many different sectors. Some forms of racial prejudice and discrimination are more obvious, and others are more subtle. However, it seems very clear from the learning from the lived experiences of BME practitioners across sectors that it is incredibly impactful. The short-term impact and the long-term impact is profound, and therefore, in many instances, the type of behaviour that we would consider to be more damaging, such as a racial slur, a racially offensive and aggressive comment, on many occasions has been cited as less impactful, almost expected. However, a look that undermines, that invalidates a person from a racial minority can be certainly more impactful in the long term. And the silence from colleagues who simply don't speak when they observe inequality and they observe unfairness towards BME colleagues can be incredibly impactful too.
This particular aspect of the session here will consider, and it is really important to consider pupil voice. You know, what are we learning from our BME pupils about their experiences of being in schools in Scotland? And Intercultural Youth Scotland and EDI Scotland co-produced this survey to really learn from young people's perceptions and experiences of racism in their schools. And there was 4 key aspects that they covered within their research, their survey rather, was teaching and learning, looking at success and achievement, the whole area around reporting racism, and thinking about culture and inclusion. So it will be interesting to explore some of those responses here. In terms of teaching and learning, and the young people were provided with a statement, subjects taught at school reflected my life experiences as a BME person in Scotland. 53.8% disagreed with this statement. And I think it's a huge statistic here, folks, for us to begin to think about that, and perhaps linking it to this idea of, you know, how do we make sure that what our young people are learning connects with their life experiences, is relevant to what they have experienced growing up. Those subjects taught at school need to reflect that. So it's culturally responsive to our young people. So it's relevant to what they're learning, and that ties in with assessment also. In English lessons, our class read books about experiences that related to my culture, heritage and background. 71.8% disagreed. So again, huge statistic here, folks, and it's really telling, you know, the conversations we have around decolonising the curriculum. And it's not about starting from scratch, folks. And that's something really important to remember. It's about saying, well, if I'm an English teacher and I'm looking at some text, you know, the core texts and novels that we ask our young people to read, sometimes those texts can be problematic. There are some, you know, racist undercurrents running throughout that. And we need to begin to ensure that our young people, not that we don't use the text, but we actually explore that text and encourage our young people to be critical of what they are reading and ask questions of it, so that we are beginning to unpack some of those perhaps stereotypes or very, you know, overt aspects of racism that come through in curriculum content. The next aspect here was about teachers and the assumptions they make about BME young people in terms of their competency, and 60.2% agreed that their teachers made these assumptions. And so if young people are thinking like that, folks, and there's certainly an issue here that needs to be addressed. You know, why is that young people feel this way? What messages are passed out to them that encourage this thinking? Teachers dismissed or devalued my contributions in class. So did they feel that their voices were being heard? Were their voices, you know, marginalised? 30.7% agreed. And I know it's probably a smaller number compared to the 60 that we see above, but for me it's still particularly a large percentage of young people saying that their contributions are not given value in the classroom setting. In terms of achievement and success, teachers at my school encouraged BAME students to achieve as much as white students, and we had 45.5% agreed there, but we also had 9.1% strong disagreement. So again, why are 9.1% of our young people disagreeing with this statement? Clearly, their experiences are telling a different story, I guess, here. Teachers at my school denied that people from a BME background face extra obstacles. So that's that invisibility again, that's that not acknowledging that there will be issues given the ethnic background that their young people come from. And 40.3% agreed that their teachers are denying that they face extra challenges. This one particularly, folks, is really interesting to comment on. Teachers at my school were knowledgeable about the processes that were required to follow if a racist incident happened at school. A staggering 51.3% strongly disagreed. Now, folks, We know already that given statistics and looking at reported incidents, I would argue that it does racism or different forms of bullying, name calling is really underreported. And I would go a step further and say, actually, when that name calling makes reference to somebody's skin colour or culture, ethnicity, then that's racism, and it should be recorded as a racist incident. And I wonder whether we have a real issue that needs to be addressed in terms of the teacher's confidence, first of all, to acknowledge that there's a racist incident has taken place, but also then begin to take accountability for that in the sense of what are we going to do as a school to address that? Because it has some real responsibilities for school leaders to take that forward. But this particular one, if I experience a racist incident at my school, I would feel able to tell my teacher. And if we think about safety, security, safe spaces, then we need to be thinking about this, folks, because 29.5% of young people strongly disagreed that if they experienced racism, they wouldn't feel that they can come and tell their teacher. And I think for me, Yasmin, teachers should be your go-to person when you're feeling unsafe, when you're feeling threatened, when you feel hurt, is something where you want to go and tell your teacher. And so what message are we giving to our young people here?
If we consider the experiences that young people are having within the school environment in the context of the Fair Work framework, do they feel that they have an effective voice? Many of them don't. Do they feel that they have the same opportunities as white pupils? Not necessarily. Do they feel that they have the security, if they do experience a racist incident, to be able to speak to their teachers confidently or speak to somebody at the school confidently? 29.5% don't. That clearly has an impact on how respected they feel and the fulfillment they feel from their learning experience within the school environment. And therefore, it's incredibly important that not only do we become more aware of the frameworks that are in place to ensure fairness within schools, colleges, and universities, and perhaps we start to discuss them more in the context of the behaviours that young people and practitioners are experiencing in the school, college, and university environment.
So this brings us to the end of the first video on this session, and we have some questions for you to reflect on as you consider the slides already delivered. How does this link to your personal and professional values in terms of what does it mean for you if you are a union rep or an equality rep, if you are a school leader, in terms of taking some of this work forward? How confident do you feel in navigating conversations about racism? So in that regard, are you familiar with some of the racial literacy that we have touched on earlier, which I'm sure we'll explore in further sessions? How confident do you feel about that, your own understanding of how racism manifests in identifying racist incidents, like the young people have said that some of their teachers would not be able to recognise that, or they wouldn't be able to approach them? How will you gain the trust and confidence of your BME colleagues? And I think that's a really important one also, Yasmin, in the sense that where you remain silent, you touched on this earlier, that if you have witnessed a conversation that you felt was inappropriate that was taking place, or an incident happened where you felt that it was inappropriate and you had to address it but didn't know how to, so you remained quiet, that remaining silent, isn't it, is where you would then lose the trust and confidence of your BME colleague. And so how will you ensure that you will work with them closely to support them through any of those experiences?
It's about establishing a relationship of trust.
Yeah.
establishing a relationship of trust where BME colleagues feel that they can disclose more about themselves. And certainly many discussions that we have where BME colleagues have chosen not to, and whether it's through a survey, whether it's through a form or a discussion, we need to dig deeper and understand why there is that reluctance. Is there a reluctance simply because any information that is disclosed that relates to ethnicity is not considered as an advantage? Many BME practitioners feel that it will serve as a disadvantage if they disclose that particular type of information. And therefore it's about establishing that relationship of trust. And as we've spoken about throughout the session, it's about ensuring that we provide safe spaces where we feel as practitioners we can have those open, honest conversations. And that's certainly a huge part of being able to effectively support BME colleagues in the first instance. How comfortable do they feel reaching out to colleagues in their workplace, out with their workplace, with respect to the experiences that they're encountering and the behaviours that they are observing. As a support organisation, we certainly speak to many practitioners who don't feel comfortable having those conversations, and we, in the first instance, try to determine why that is the case. Is it simply a reluctance? Is there also a vulnerability there? We all have our particular coping mechanisms and our strategies, and therefore many of us choose not to discuss these matters within our workplace simply because it then involves a vulnerability, it involves further discussion with respect to really uncomfortable and sensitive subject matters. And for many of us, we feel that we would rather have that conversation with someone who is impartial. That neutrality suggests a greater sense of comfort. And therefore, it's incredibly important that we have a better understanding. We have a better understanding of the level of comfort that colleagues feel. Colleagues who are underrepresented on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and ensure that we have the appropriate space and we have the appropriate support mechanisms in place for them within the organisation, but also we can signpost them out with the organisation.